Okay, hello everyone. Once again, my name is Andrea Thompson. I'm the founder and director of the Film Festival. And, also a little as a side, freelance writer, also covering Sundance. And speaking of which, I have with me 7 remarkable female directors of films playing at Sundance. So, ladies, since there's so many of you, I'd like you to go around and introduce yourselves and which film you're directing. Rosemary, why don't we start with you?
Hi, yeah, I'm Rosemary Vasquez Brown. I directed G&T, and G&T is a film about female friendship and the contradictions of female friendship.
Renee?
Oh, hi there. My name is Renee Maria Sibu, and I directed and produced short documentary Dear Philadelphia. And Dear Philadelphia explores the partnership between forgiveness and community.
Alicia, sorry.
Yeah. Hi. Hi, I'm Alicia, and I am the co-writer and director for the short film Lata that plays in Shorts Program 2, I think, at Sundance. And the film is about a 22-year-old domestic laborer as she navigates an upper-class home in South Mumbai.
Nomi?
Hi, I'm Noemi Nakai. I directed Tea's Teacher. It's a short documentary about a Japanese man who teaches people to cry.
And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Herna. I also directed G&T with Rosemary, and you can watch G&T in the animated shorts program in Sundance.
Excellent. And last but not least?
Hello, my name is Lekagva Dulam Purevachir. I'm from Mongolia, and I am the director of short film Mountain Cat. Mountain Cat is about a young woman who is taken to a shaman, and contrary to what she expects, she gets an opportunity after the ritual to kind of express her feelings and explore her body.
That kind of goes into my next question, which is, well, as different as your short films are, they all strike me as each of them is all in their very different way about women who are kind of like, well, not women in every case, characters who are defying expectations placed on them in their own way, I think, or trying to, whatever those expectations are. So, Sarah and Rosemary, why don't I start with you and ask you what drew you to your story?
You go.
What drew us to our story? That's a good question. I think we've been making stories about these 3 characters for so long, so it was probably the characters. We were initially inspired by conversations that we were having with our friends and with each other, and the ways in which we would validate each other for completely abnormal, gross things and experiences. And we thought that was really funny. And we thought once we had the characters that they had a really interesting dynamic and tension. And it was also a tension that we could relate to. We're meeting them at a point where they've kind of outgrown each other. And they're holding on to a friendship for a lot of reasons that probably it might be easier to let go of that friendship, really. So we just thought they had a really interesting tension, I guess. What do you think, Rosemary?
No, yeah, I agree. It was based on the real conversations we were having. Definitely not on our friendship. Like, there's no tension between us two, but we can relate to it from other experiences for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure it had nothing to do with you, but of course not. Of course not.
Can't stand each other.
Nomi, how about yours? Your film.
Mine is about. I think I was speaking at the same time. Sorry.
No.
You good? Okay. So mine is about men. Oh, so it's not really the same thing. But I think I normally work in fiction. I don't do documentaries, but I was doing research for a fiction project I was working on, and then I just discovered this man in Japan who teaches people to cry, and I found it so weird and quirky and also quite touching that I just wanted to do a short portrait on him, which is why I made a short documentary on him. So it's just something I found online while doing research, and I just found it so weird that I thought someone had to do something about him and showcase his story to the world, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And Alicia, what drew you to your particular to the story you tell in your film?
I think it's multiple things. In many ways, Lata for me was as much a formal experiment. The project sort of was born in a class I took. It was a class exploring specifically just Chantal Ackerman's cinema. And I got very obsessed with this idea of how to use cinema as a tool to depict the invisible, and the invisible as a broader theme. I think most of my work now explores that. So it was this like collision between a certain formal a desire to explore a certain formal aesthetics with also something a social subject matter that's been very close to my heart for a very long time. I mean, I grew up in Mumbai. I grew up in a home that has domestic labor. I have always had questions around how both cinema and literature across the across the centuries, have depicted the working class, specifically coming out of India. And I wanted to sort of put those two together and see if there was a way to create a different narrative around it. And I think primarily it was a desire to explore how, because to me, Lata is not invisible to herself, right? But she's invisible to the invisibility is imposed on her, but to herself she's extremely visible. So it was this exploration of how to make how to turn the lens on the audience and make us think about what we render invisible and how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that gave birth to the film.
And Renee, same question.
Yeah. Sorry, do you mind repeating your question if that's okay?
Oh yes, that's perfectly fine. And what do you to this to telling the story you did?
What do I attribute, did you say?
Oh no. What drew you to this story you told, which is
so
Philadelphia, a specific neighborhood in Philadelphia and the residents.
Yeah. So with Dear Philadelphia, this is my first ever short film, and I'm a photographer by practice. And for the last 5 years, I've been going to and from Philadelphia and just documenting the community, the people in the community. The first ever time I went there was just to volunteer at a summer camp, and then I just really fell in love with it and wanted to have some consistency with some of the kids that I met, and then that just developed into documenting and wanting to archive the people that I was meeting and the experiences I was having. And then about 2 years ago, I was like, this would actually be a great documentary. There are some really incredible people here, some really special stories. I'm growing as a person as a result of the people that I'm meeting and I'm interacting with. So yeah, I gave birth to it came to birth 2 years ago, the idea, and then not in 2019. Actually shot the documentary. So I already had a relationship with Mel, who is one of the protagonists in the documentary, and then a lot of the other people I met along the way whilst filming. And yeah, I was just really drawn to their stories of community and forgiveness. And then, the community and the people within the main people within the film are people who I feel like have overcome a lot in their lives, and as a result are incredibly, empowering other people in their community. And I just think their stories just needed to be shared, and I'm just really grateful for them sharing them with me. But yeah, I think what I also loved about this particular story was that, the people, everyone that shared with me, it wasn't about, it wasn't for us to feel sorry or to pity their stories, but more so to understand people who come from different backgrounds than ours. And this story specifically focuses on 3 men who are fathers, and showing the sensitivity of Black male fatherhood within a supportive community.
Yeah, that also answers one of the other questions I was going to ask, is how you got that kind of access, because you're from London, correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Luke, sorry. Lukavadulam, forgive me if I butchered your name after you told me how to pronounce it outright. You mentioned what your story is about, but why did you decide to tell the story about a girl meeting the shaman?
It's actually based on this experience I had where I was taken by my mother. So it kind of mirrors how I experienced it. So the perspective of the girl in the film is very much close to how I was kind of experiencing the whole situation with the ritual and kind of being introduced into this environment where a small environment where I was very intimately close with this spirit who seemed to be, well, it was scary, and the voice that the shaman was using was very kind of gruff, and so it was just something that I wasn't immediately comfortable with. And okay, it's a ritual, etc., etc. And it finished, and afterwards I was waiting for my mom to come out, and this kid who was, I guess, in his 21 or 22, came and sat next to me. He took out his phone and he started playing a game on his phone, and he had, full sleeve tattoos on his arms, and he had an earring on one ear. He was very cool, couldn't give a damn about me. And after we left the house, my mom said, "Oh, did you see that cute boy? That was the shaman that you had seen." And during the ritual, because they're clothed so differently and they're using a certain voice and everything is just otherworldly, so it was very hard for me to kind of put these two different realities together. And after leaving, I started to think that this is actually what young people in Mongolia have to deal with, because there is a certain schizophrenic duality to our experience as young people, because we do have this culture that's very much rooted in spirituality, and we still have very strong connections to ancestor worship and nature worship, but at the same time we are a very much quickly developing country. We have a lot of gender equality in the country. We don't necessarily have, religious oppression. We are actually a very Western-oriented country at the same time. So this type of duality actually makes, I thought personally that it was making my life a little bit difficult, and I couldn't really understand why sometimes something drove me crazy. And I thought I just wanted to make a film about this encounter, and but I didn't want to, make any criticism or kind of draw, grand ideas or conclusions about the situation. I just wanted to show this experience and how we as young people live with it and live around it.
It would have been really easy for you in your film to villainize the shaman himself.
Oh, absolutely. And I still get a few people saying, "Oh God, spirituality and people like, fake spiritualism, etc." With my film, I wasn't criticizing at all. In my view, I believe in them, and in the film, even I do believe that it's actually the shaman or the spirit who kind of quote unquote arranges the encounter that happens on the hill, because it's the spirit who actually asks the girl, "What is it that you really want?" And that's something that neither her mother or people around her has, asks her. So it's the spirit who says, "What is it that you really want?" And you have this girl who's been kind of growing up alone and without friends because of her illness, and she's about to have this life-saving, potentially, dangerous surgery. And I just thought, what could a girl want? She has this moment on the hill that's completely what she really needs, without really even her understanding what it is. And in my mind, I thought it was the spirit that kind of set up that scene.
Definitely. She was going after what she wanted somewhat subconsciously. And yeah. On a completely different note, I want to address my next question to Sarah and Rosemary. Your art style in your film is very unusual. Were there any kind of specific influences that any kind of specific influences in your film that influenced that style of animation?
Yeah. Oh, go for it, Rosemary.
Yeah, it was just like we were looking at a lot of illustrators, and because we were making comics about them, I think that really comic-y illustrative style was really present when deciding on design for the film. Plus, we have quite different illustrative styles on our own as well, because we love to draw, because we're both animators first and foremost. And so we kind of like took from that, but also had our own original styles and tried our hardest to combine them without seeming like there was like too many hands on the one project.
Yeah, I think that was a challenge though. That was maybe, one of the most difficult parts for us was combining both of our sort of natural, organic, or maybe not natural and organic, but at least the styles that we've developed over the years, and making it look like its own separate thing, not like a compromise between two people's drawing styles. And yeah, I think we're influenced by so many people. We're influenced by so many short films as well, 2D animated films. I think like we watched Virus Tropical a few years before at Annecy, and I'm not sure if it. I don't think you'd be able to see the stylistic influence definitely, but that was the first time that we had watched a black and white 2D animated film, and we really, really struggled with style as well, taking back the colors. Like at first we were animating in full color, and then once we decided to peel back the colors and just have a few and highlight where we really wanted to highlight, I think that helped direct the audience's eye. And I wonder if we would have done it like that otherwise. Yeah, that was just a thought that I had right now though.
I don't think so.
And Nomi, I have a question for you in your movie Tears Teacher, which is basically about a man teaching people to cry. I expect, and frankly, the way your film kind of subverted my expectations, I kind of expected a lot of his students or clients to, frankly, be male, but in his class, you see people of all ages, and men and women too. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that was? I mean, that so many people needed help to cry.
Well, I mean, if you've been to Japan, you know that Japan is a really, I mean, I was brought up in Japan, but we're not really taught to express our emotions. It's really frowned upon, if you start shouting or crying or just be emotional in front of people, it's considered rude to other people. It's like you're stepping outside of the boundaries that are fixed by society. So, historically, women are not supposed to get angry. They're always supposed to be really, contained. And
in the US, we have nothing like that. I swear. Nothing like that in the US, I swear. Don't worry, that was sarcastic. That was sarcastic.
Yeah. And then on the opposite side, men are always, supposed to be really strong and male, and then be angry and strong and not really vulnerable. So I think, but I thought that he would have a lot of male clients, as you said, but it was actually mainly females. But I think it's just because they were more open to the idea of crying, of being vulnerable in groups, and they were more attracted to the idea of trying to open up, whereas guys were a bit more reluctant to try it out. But we did a couple sessions and workshops with him, and it was very balanced and of all ages. So I I don't really know what to say about that.
No, thank you very much. It actually does explain a few things as someone who's never been there, who only knows it from media. So thank you. And Alicia, question about the style of your film is, well, it's not like you. Well, other films take the approach of showing, not telling, and your film does that. But I noticed it was more specific than that. You let the small details speak for themselves, and you make you take care to emphasize like people just waiting for various things. So I was curious as to why you decided to take that approach.
I think it was many things. Sort of the aesthetics of the film set. I think they came even before the story came or before the characters came. It was very clear to me that I wanted to explore time as a class divider and in the ways in which across classes, specifically in India, but I think it happens elsewhere too. The privilege to experience time is something that is very much reserved for an upper class, and the ways in which the idea of waiting and constantly having to wait your turn, wait to steal a moment for privacy, they're all sort of indicative of what class you belong to. And so it was very clear that I wanted the camera to be static, to have the audience experience time from the perspective of another class. So it was that. And I also think, let's see what else. For me personally, writing this film was also navigating and grappling with my own questions. And also it is a film that straddles ethical lines, I think, in some ways. I am from a upper middle class, upper class background, an upper caste woman from India making a film about the working class. And I think that is something will always remain a sensitive subject matter. And so I wanted to always have some distance with my character, to make very clear that the film is not an attempt at like showing you her life or showing you or giving her a voice. It's more an attempt at recognizing the distance between us and sort of taking from and emulating models of ethnographic cinema that have always had this like outside looking in model. I sort of wanted to flip it on its head and also emphasize that I am also an outsider. And the film was shot in my own home using members of my own family, which were all important to me as ways to implicate my own presence within the system and what it means. And I think in that sense, the film to me was that's why to me I've always referred to the film as a hybrid, because a lot of the techniques we adopted were documentary, but I also think the lines in between documentary and fiction are a lot more murky than we'd like to acknowledge, and that so much of this film was observational and blurring those lines. But most of the cast in this film, specifically Shobha, who plays Lata, she's a domestic laborer herself. We cast from the domestic labor community. We use my family and home. And so I think all of those choices, those aesthetic choices, were choices for me to navigate the ethics of making a film like this. And also consistently reminding the viewer that everything you're watching is constructed, right? And like that everything you're watching is from the perspective of an outsider, even though I am an Indian woman. There's different lines of inside and outside that I'm crossing. So yeah, those were some of the reasons why we kept so much distance. And another element of the film that I think the aesthetics of the film speaks to is also this idea of public and private. What is private? Who has the right to privacy? What are the illusions of privacy the upper class lives with? And in some ways, by keeping a distance from Lata, I want to acknowledge and respect her own privacy. That my access to her is also limited in a particular way, and that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah, someone who comes from the working class myself, I appreciate the consideration, and it was evident. And Renee, you also had a very unique filmmaking style with Dear Philadelphia. It was told as kind of a series of vignettes, very poetically, as they were kind of all interwoven with stories like taking precedence at different times. And I'm curious as to why you chose that approach.
I think, in terms of the style of, I think every single person that I've met in the film, I've met in completely different places, different encounters, and I wanted it to show that these were like individuals with their own, individual stories and experiences, but that they had so many similarities. Like, so many of the people in the film, are fathers. So many people in the film are overcoming. So many people in the film, maybe they have been incredibly, impacted by the drug epidemic that happened as well, and how that's impacted their lives. And so these people have so much in common, even though they have such different stories. So I kind of wanted to show that they have their own like mini chapters in the film, but that they just all feed off one another. They all just work one after the other so well because they are part of the same community, and so many things have affected one another in the same way. And also for me, like this is, even the film being called Dear Philadelphia, it is meant to be almost in this like letter writing form. And I wanted to show it in like how I've experienced Philadelphia and how just almost like how I've seen like over the years, like my experience in Philadelphia, and just feeling like, wow, here's one amazing experience, here's another amazing experience, another really cool story. And that's just how like the beat of the film, I wanted it to be like that. Yeah, I think I really wanted my audience to take their time and how they interacted with each story, and each person that was giving them the opportunity to be invited into their experiences, and really, I think taking the time to break up the film, that it wasn't just like, oh, that was a nice little film, but these are really people who are vulnerably giving you their time. And so I think I wanted the film to have those mini chapters so people had the time to process what they've just taken in as well.
Thank you. And Rosemary and Sarah, your film, which is all about social media and the negative influence it can have, actually tells a more complex story. You acknowledge social media as the force for good it can be, and you don't completely blame social media for how it can warp us, for lack of a better word. You make a point to show that a lot of it's almost designed to reward the most negative behavior. So I'm curious as to your feelings, both of you, on social media. Like, do you think it can be you think it can be a force for good? Most people don't think so, but I imagine you have complex feelings about it. Both of you.
You go first,
Yeah,
Sarah.
I think, yeah, I'll tell you all that Rosemary's exactly like that. She commodifies herself. No, I'm joking. Yeah, I think maybe, I mean, it's interesting that you took it like that, and I'm happy that you did. I think that
so many films blame
our
relationship. Social media, they're terrible, they're awful. They really blame the female characters and make them into symbols of all that's wrong. But your film took a more complex approach, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I think Glenn has a really complex relationship with social media. I think she knows that it is negative, and she sees it as a way to advance herself. And I think social media was just a really good tool to exaggerate the tension in the relationship between the three female characters, and then also their relationship with the outside world and the ways in which they and we are sort of forced to be validated externally, and there's so much attention on being validated externally. I think Glenn really thrives on external validation. I don't know if she could live without it, which is not necessarily a positive thing. But I think that's the fun of the film, is that you don't really know what's good and what's bad. It feels a little bit chaotic, or hopefully it feels a little bit chaotic. And in reality, we are forced to sort of interact with people via social media, and we are forced to commodify aspects of ourselves in some way, I think. Even though I'm relatively inactive on social media, I think it's very difficult to opt out of. So I think Glenn is sort of aware of all this symbolism around her. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's just definitely no limit to what you can put on social media. And I sometimes think, like, if you can't get validation from people in your life, then yeah, go online, get a little bit, but not all of it. And then come back to your friends, get back down to earth, and then go back. Like, it's a balance. It's a good balance. And I think the chaos of our film really displays that balance. No, but yeah, I'm glad you saw that in our film. I love that.
Thank you. And Luca Badalam, I was interested in how you depicted your central character, the daughter who's going to this shaman, and she's really the only one in the film who doesn't have that reverence for him and kind of the religion in general there. Why do you think that is? And you don't, from what you've said, I get the sense that you really don't feel that way necessarily. But why did you decide to go that route with her?
Yes, because I do feel that that shamanism and spirituality is something that's easily exploited by society, and this is the other angle that I wanted to kind of hit upon, is that it is possible for shamans, I guess, who are faking the spiritual connection with the ancestors, etc., to take advantage of people who need them, because Mongolia really lacks the kind of infrastructural and social support that people would need, like psychiatrists and marriage counselors and just things that people don't have access to. Everything they need, they try to get it from shamans. So it is, I guess, I could say it's a vulnerable situation in Mongolia that does get taken advantage of. Personally, in the film, I tried not to depict somebody who was taking advantage, but I think the main character, because she is somebody who has an illness and whose mother has taken to many, shamans and healers and, spiritual people, that she probably has met many of the people who were taking advantage of her mother, and it's really her mother's need, to get emotional support from these spiritual heads. So I did want to show that aspect of it as well. And it's really up to, I guess, everyone to really decide for themselves whether or not the shaman is real or not. Personally, I do believe in him. I would interpret, the ending of the film as kind of having some kind of a spiritual influence, but it could very well be seen from the other perspective, that that she's kind of, her mother and they are being taken advantage of, and that in reality he's also just this young man who's part of this world, because shamans, they also don't choose. It's kind of imposed upon them. So really these young people are there without any choice. And so I just wanted to kind of show the different aspects of it.
Yeah, and the more I researched your film, like shamans are increasing as the country Mongolia, right, westernizes, right, and bringing kind of more inequality and everything, as I understand.
Yes, and just becoming more Western and more modern, it does, because modernity and it doesn't really bring, it doesn't necessarily have a spiritual side. I think people need it to survive, especially a country whose history and tradition is so much connected to ancestral worship. I think this need is very much felt, and in our society we just don't have the outlets that would normally be of support to people. So there is a lot of poverty. There are a lot of people who turn to shamans instead of to organizations and institutions and government institutions.
Thank you. And I want to talk to Nomi on a completely different note. In your film, like, you don't just mention the emotional benefits of allowing yourself to cry and feel. Your subject, the teacher who teaches people to cry, says he gets less colds and feels more physically healthy. Do you yourself believe that's also like a benefit of his philosophy too? Why don't you think people mention that?
Yeah, he did give me a really long lecture about the health benefits of crying, with like a lot of evidence and scientific jargon that I just cut out of the film because it was a lot. But yeah, there is actually some studies that explain that the more you cry, hormones, whatever, you can look it up. It's supposed to be good and boosts your immune system. But originally I set to do a short film that was going to be a little comedy about this guy who's quirky and weird. Turns out that we end up going somewhere quite deep and personal and a bit more dark than what was planned. And I think that was great because I didn't want to do, like a National Geographic scientific piece about crying. It was more about opening a door and saying, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable. Like you don't have to attend crime workshops, but it's fine if sometimes you just feel down and you have a cry, and it happens to everyone. That was really the purpose of making the film. So I was kind of avoiding stepping into too much, scientific A+B blah blah jargon. But it's all online. He has a website with pages of explanation of how it's good to cry if any of you want to have a read.
Thank you. And Alicia, I have a question about kind of how your film ended, at the risk of keeping the spoilers to a minimum. But at the end of your film, you show Latash, you show her like finally taking her time, taking time for herself, like just at a celebration. And but then after that, you show kind of the darkened house, the darkened environment she worked in. I was kind of curious as to why that was kind of the last image in your film.
I think again, some of these aspects were clear to me before the film was made, was that I didn't want to end on celebration, and I didn't want to end on it was clear that it's not my responsibility as either a filmmaker or an artist to release her on celluloid. I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's my place. And I didn't want to end on that. I wanted to make clear that the house does await. She does come back home. The routine does continue. And in some ways that, the last, well, I guess we're giving away a little bit, but it's okay. The last few shots of the film are the empty house at night. And in some way, for me, it was, and I'd consider it like an afterthought or a postscript, right? That like this pristine space that is being so mollycoddled and like lives within these boundaries of privacy, it isn't just like that by magic, right? There's these bodies that perform the labor that maintain these illusions of privacy, and it was very much an attempt to come back to say that she will return to this tomorrow and this will continue. And also something that I'm not sure how it plays out watching it online, because sound is a really important part of this film. It was actually, before we even had a script, we had I wouldn't even call it a sound script, but we had lists of sounds that then drove each scene. And for the end of the film, I wanted very much a drop in sound from the celebration to when we returned to, I think I lost everybody. Oh, there we are.
No.
When we return to the lobby of the building and then up into the house, the sound gets pushed further and further away and then also gets lower. And that was very much sort of a re-emphasis on how disconnected the societies are in India, that almost this hierarchy of life. There's life on the streets, and then there's life up in these bubbled, built worlds of privacy. And I wanted to emphasize that like we share the same space, we live in the same city, but our lives are very much disconnected and almost hierarchicalized in a particular way. And yeah, there's a lot of things in the film that I think are also particularly addressing an Indian audience. And an example would be the end of the film, where the celebration is a particular festival, and it's called Ganpati, and it's which isn't, I don't think that's imperative for an audience to know, to understand the film. But if you're in an Indian audience, you would know what the festival is. And on that day, I think something very powerful happens, that like there's almost a switch in the power dynamics of who owns public space, because on that day the streets are very much belong to the working class. Like you'll often hear upper middle class people say, like, don't go to the streets unless you have to, there's going to be traffic jams, like just avoid it. And it's because the celebrations take to the streets. And on that day, the street belongs to the working class. And then somehow, once the festival is over, we readjust and go back to like an old power dynamic. And like, I think that to me is also fascinating, the ways in which we control public and private space. And during that moment, the streets belong to Lata, and they also belong to the working class in a way that the upper class sits up, perched on it in its home, and all you hear is the sound of life that is far away and disconnected. So for me, those were some of the thoughts and why it was so important to come back to the house.
I see. Thank you.
Mhm.
And Renee, I have something of a bit of a cliched question to ask you, or just one for female filmmakers especially. I'm curious as to how your perspective as like again a female director kind of impacted why and how you told the story, which is primarily the story of Black fathers in this neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess, yeah, me being a female probably did impact the film quite a bit. I think, the film does show a lot more like a vulnerable and sensitive like side of the men in the film. And I think a lot of that probably does come from like, my own gender as well, and my own gaze and perspective of how, I perceive what's going on as well. And even the kind of conversations I'd be having is a reflection of what you see in the documentary. And I think, there's a sensitivity and there's a vulnerability that also comes with being a man. But I just think that side isn't always really reflected much in media, isn't reflected much in film. So I don't think I was necessarily, trying to mirror what was inside myself. And I guess just with, who I am, more trying to show that side that already exists within, male fatherhood. Not the comment.
Thank you. And Luca Vadalam, I'm also curious as to the ending of your film. Why do you choose to end on kind of a wider perspective of the world? Again, I hope that's not too big a spoiler for your film. Like Alicia ends on this like enclosed space, but so I'm curious as to why you focused on this wide open space that of the country basically.
I tried to, from the beginning, kind of show the film through her perspective. So I was very, very close to her and close to the details that she was looking at, and because she's a very closed person. She doesn't have many friends. She doesn't have many people to really talk to. She doesn't have an outlet to express herself. And so my idea was that this encounter on the hill does kind of open up her perspective and allows her to position herself within, I guess, society, just because of this encounter that allows her to express herself and maybe experience something that she, as a young woman, she wasn't able to experience before. So she's finally kind of getting out of her head and experiencing world with an outer perspective. But I would also say it's kind of an abstract, well, more of an ambiguous ending, that it's not the what she's looking out into, even though it's wide, it's also kind of unclear and not necessarily very bright and optimistic.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And speaking of optimistic or non-optimistic outlooks, Sarah and Rosemary, in your film, like it's animated, so obviously in animation you have a lot of control over how you depict your characters. And I noticed how you depicted your female characters was very, very no matter their body type, and there were a variety of bodies that we saw in this film. The female characters were very not only not objectified but very non-idealized in a way, which is very rare. So why did you decide to kind of depict those characters that way?
Yeah, well, I think our story, it's like we started making stories about these girls because we wanted to feel heard by narratives, and like even like funny ones as well. Like we hadn't seen much representation of women our age, nor women with our body types in any media. And even if we were making something that was like jokey, we still wanted to, I don't know, like feel like people like us would be heard throughout. And so a lot of the character designs Sarah started the character designs, and I think based it off our bodies a lot of the time. And yeah, I don't know, I love them because of it, I think. And a lot of people relate to it so much more just by seeing those kind of more real bodies. So,
Yeah, I think also coming from like our context. I mean, living in Australia and specifically living in Sydney, we have just such a huge range of people. Like Sydney is filled with so many different types of people. So it was almost like an easy choice for us. Body wise, a lot of the people, sorry, the site keeps going off. A lot of the people that we based the characters off, even the characters in the backgrounds, they were based off of real people. And like, why wouldn't you want a world to look like that? I guess, like, if you can control everything in the world, I guess it was an easy decision from that perspective. In terms of not objectifying them, I think that maybe wasn't even intentional that we didn't objectify them. I think we were. It's maybe just not the way that we look at other women. Like we naturally probably don't objectify them as much as wider society would, especially when we have so much empathy and relate so deeply to these women. But I would argue that Glenn is probably trying her best to objectify herself anyway.
yeah.
So I think while we might be putting in the work not to objectify her, I think Glenn is really putting in the work for everyone else to view her as an object and a sexual object. So I think that's also the fun of it, is that we sit in that contradiction all the time. And I think the film reflects all of those contradictions that we're sort of forced to grapple with. Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, and speaking of contradictions, Nomi, I have a question about a very specific moment in your film, Tears Teacher. I rarely see a documentary, whether it's a feature or a short film, that kind of keeps a reference to the camera. But in your film, when the teacher's like saying to someone who's talking to you, "Oh yeah, there's a camera here. They're filming me for a documentary." That felt like that felt very interesting. Why did you decide to keep that in there?
I think I love the moment because, first of all, it's quite fun. You know, I wanted to keep as much humor in the documentary as possible, especially because it's about crying. And also because it was really interesting to see how much of his time he spends trying to tell people to open up and be vulnerable and be themselves. But when it's about himself, he's so happy, you know, that people are making a documentary about him, and he's boasting about it to everyone. He's like, oh, they're making a documentary about me. Hi. And you're like, you're also playing a role right here. You're not really being yourself. So I think like that contrast, that dichotomy between, you know, him trying to be so hard to be this kind of preachy, just be yourself person, but also realizing that he also plays a little double game in front of the camera.
Definitely. And Alicia, there's a question we kind of like approached in my previous questions about your film, like in terms of invisibility and how you chose to depict Lata's story. Why do you wait till the end to state her name, even though it's the title of your short film?
I think some of that happened in the edit, but it was something I wanted. It was like, while a lot of the process of writing this film was I had graphical representations of the ways in which I wanted the audience to experience their own realization of when they fully recognize that the film is about Lata. Like, the way the film opens, there's this event, and like the election commission's officers there, and it's like, did your grandmother die? And there's this expectation of this becoming a particular kind of narrative from where we switch. And I think part of not wanting to reveal her name was in line with this thought that as the film progresses, the hope is that the audience also switches in its realization of what and whom and how the protagonist has come to the forefront. That it isn't, yes, I am the one manipulating when and how she comes to the forefront, but also a recognition that when you hear her name for the first time, you hear it when after 25 minutes of this film have passed and you're watching this woman, and have you had the thought that we still don't know what she's named, right? And like there's that moment in the end where the young daughter in the house turns around and says, "You look so pretty." And that's the first time you see the family acknowledge Lata. So it's this like pivotal moment wherein all of a sudden, upon their decision and upon their time, she became visible to them, right? So it's that moment of how and when we choose to make people visible, and what does it mean to attach. I think it was in some ways trying to touch upon the fact that, which is something that to me is important in the film, is that unlike other labor structures, when it comes to domestic labor in India, you live with the family, which means that you're 24/7 adorning the role of labor. And what happens to the other identities that we carry, like a mother, a father, a sister, a friend, all of those identities somehow become schizophrenically attached to your labor, because she's constantly switching between Lata the woman and Lata the maid. And I think for that reason, I wanted to not have her name be heard at all until right at the end of the film, where you've watched her perform this labor for so long. And then when the name pops up, to me, it's this recognition that, like, yes, she's cleaning these spaces, but there's a woman here. There's an identity beyond the sounds of her labor that occupies this space, that only became visible to the family when they decided to bring it to the forefront by calling her name. So yeah, I think, that was in some ways the thought. I don't know, I just always knew that we wouldn't be introduced to her name until the end of the film.
Yes, thank you. And Renee, I think one of the things I found most interesting about your film is acknowledging the reality of violence in the neighborhood you were kind of chronicling, but also not allowing it to be at the forefront, not allowing it to define anybody, even if it did define the lives of some of your subjects, and most importantly, not glorifying it. How did you kind of take care to make sure that that the violence would not be depicted in basically in a non-exploitative way?
Yeah. I guess the film, obviously, like, from when the people in the film are speaking, they do talk about things such as like abuse. I think when they're speaking about abuse, a lot of it is about like it's abuse in their childhoods or things like that. But I think in terms of violence in the film, there isn't much regard to violence, and that also is just because those weren't things that were spoken about. I think obviously within the community there is violence as much as there is violence, in all of the communities that we all live in. So I don't think it really had to be, manipulated, that I had to take out the topic of violence or bring it in too much. But I think, so for me, it wasn't a matter of having to really think about that too much. But I do think, even from the question, I do think there is, when places like North Philadelphia are spoken about in the media, a lot of it is showing the violence that is taking place rather than showing a lot of the positive stories, positive things that are happening. So I think for me, it wasn't necessarily, I'm deliberately not going to focus on the violence. Obviously that was a choice, but it was quite easy to find these, inspiring people and to have conversations with them that spoke about, some of the things that they have overcome, some of the things that, you know, is going great for them in their communities. So yeah, I feel like those conversations weren't hard to have, but unfortunately, those aren't the narratives that I think are normally focused on, especially with Black men, and especially Black men in America.
That might answer my next question, which is, what do you want people to ultimately take from your film?
I think ultimately, I really want people to take what they will from the film. I think for me, like when I made this film, it was about me growing in my understanding of love and my understanding of forgiveness. And I think I really want this piece to be something that's quite reflective. And, you know, somebody may watch this film and they realize, you know, that maybe they have some biases or they have some discrimination, you know, already in their hearts towards this kind of community, and it's challenged from what they watch. You know, somebody else might feel like this film is really uplifting, and they really need to hear some of these things said and find it really hopeful. So I think what people take will be a reflection of what they're going through at the moment. But I do hope that ultimately, with all of us, you know, our perspectives can be challenged from watching the film, and that it can be a sense of hope.
Thank you. And my final question for all of you, what's that I'm going to ask all of you? What's next for you, Renee?
What's next for me? Yeah, so originally, Dear Philadelphia, I really wanted to make a feature-length film for it, but you know, it being my first ever film, I wanted to just explore short film format as well. So I really would like to make this into a feature film. So that is my goal post-pandemic, when I can return to Philadelphia.
There's hoping a lot of that'll happen soon. Yeah. And Alicia, what do you want? What do you want audiences ideally to take from your film?
I think more than anything, it's a recognition of the micro violences that people around us and the spaces we live in are constantly experiencing, and the ways in which just language and how you talk to somebody, how you close a door, the micro gestures and the micro violences we commit on a daily basis, and the ways in which the structures we live in are perpetuating invisibility in a particular way. And that honestly, I do think I'm not asking that one person or one human take on the task of dismantling the structure, but I do think individually we are all responsible for these microviolences, and that there's ways to be more consciously aware of them and of the people that occupy the spaces we live in, and to sort of slowly work on changing our relationship, both in cinema and in literature, and like the ways in which we depict the relationship between the working class and the upper class, this consistent need to represent the working class as in need of our pity, which is not what I think it is. I think the mirror needs to be switched on to us and on the ways in which we navigate these spaces. And I think that is all I really want from the film. There was this statement that I said quite often at the big, because a lot of making this film also meant encountering my own family and having to cast them in this film and put them and like use my house meant a lot of conversations. And for me, the process of making a film and the process of is perhaps even more important than the film itself. And like we did challenge a lot of the hierarchies on set and all of these things. And there was this statement that I kept repeating to my mom, and it was like, Mom, the point of the film is not to blame you. It's just to make us, we tend to live like this. And I would like us to slightly open our blinders and look at the people that surround the space just to the left and the right, and acknowledge that it is always easier to live with blinders on. Because if we really open the blinders up a little bit more, the systems of oppression we live in are so intense that they're hard to acknowledge. But I do think it's our jobs, it is our duty to acknowledge the systems of oppression we participate in. And just that acknowledgement is a really good first step. So yeah, I think that would be what I would want for people to take away.
And Nomi, what would you like audiences to take from your film, and what's next for you?
I think it's simply just to be more gentle on ourselves, I guess. You don't have to be crying all the time. The film is not really about crying. It's more about, being fine, being vulnerable sometimes. And I think it sounds quite obvious to people like us when we work in the creative industries, and all the films here, I think, are all really personal, and we all had to put some of ourselves and be vulnerable and bare our souls to make them. I think it's way less obvious for people who maybe don't work in the creative arts on a day-to-day basis. So I think just being gentle now on ourselves, and being fine opening up, and not always being this perfect, I got my life together, successful person. And what I'm working on, I'm prepping for our first feature that we're shooting in Japan, hopefully at the end of the year. So I know traveling is not great right now, but if anyone comes to Japan, come say hi.
Love that. Rosemary and Sarah, what would you like people to take away from your film, ideally, and what's next for you?
I always say, yeah, I hope people laugh first and foremost, or just enjoy themselves while watching it, and are able to relate to our characters or something in it, or I don't know, have the film validate something about themselves while watching it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I second that. And maybe question your choices on social media. And what's next for us? We really want to develop the characters further. That would be ideal. We'd love to make something longer form with them, maybe a TV show. So that would be next. Hopefully, we intended it originally as a proof of concept, and we have a lot of stories to tell with these three girls.
It's not over.
Definitely. That'll definitely be interesting. That'll definitely be interesting. And Lakagvadulam, ideally, what would you like people to take, and what's next for you?
I think I would just like people to be transported to my corner of the world, and maybe for foreign people to maybe see another side of Mongolia that's a little bit different than what they imagine as this beautiful land filled with horses and nomadic people. And I mean, we do have a different aspect to our country, so I think it would be nice for the rest of the world to maybe get to know that side of us. But really, my core intention is that young people in Mongolia are able to watch the film and really, really find themselves. Maybe the things that they're unable to express, that they kind of grasp it in the film, because kind of living in this dual reality is very tiring, and it does put a toll on people's psychology, and this is not something that's very much acknowledged.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And what's next?
The film is not really a proof of concept, but I did make the short film in order to explore the characters of a feature film script I had. So it is connected to a feature, and right now I'm kind of in the funding stage, looking for money.
Wish good luck, and hope that comes to fruition. Let me know if it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's about a wrap. I want to thank you all for joining me and for speaking with me, and hope you all enjoy Sundance, albeit even if it can only happen virtually. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us, Andrea.
Yeah.
And thanks for the great questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. I tried. Thank you. And we are out.